On March 23, 1945, at 2100 hours along the western shore of the Rhine River, close to Wesel in Germany, the binoculars trembled slightly in the hands of Aust Wilhelm Steinberg as he surveyed the fading light over the river's surface, jotting down notes in his field journal, entries that would eventually turn up in seized German papers at Army Group headquarters. The Americans had arrived at our hallowed waterway, yet they were powerless to pass it. No force in history had ever breached the Rhine facing staunch German opposition without the aid of bridges. Amid the deepening twilight, he had recently spotted an occurrence that solidified 3 years of Wehrmacht defensive principles. Bursts from artillery lit up the western side. Countless cannons were readying themselves for the kind of classic river attack that German leaders anticipated would demand extended setup, established bridge-building efforts, and exposed transit zones their 88mm cannons could methodically obliterate. For 2,000 years in Germany, the Rhine had safeguarded the country. Even as the Reich disintegrated under pressure from both flanks, Army engineers confidently told commanders that the river's 300 ft span and rapid flow rendered any traversal impossible absent prolonged engineering work. Some 2,000 soldiers from the 51st Highland Division's 7th Battalion, Black Watch, geared up to plunge into the stream. Not relying on fragile landing craft that would ferry troops repeatedly amid enemy fire, nor holding back for engineers to erect pontoon spans beneath shelling, but instead using wheeled craft that German spies had disastrously undervalued. The odd boat-like vehicles known as Dukw had appeared in Normandy and Italy, yet Wehrmacht evaluators brushed them off as niche tools for shore landings, useless for battles over rivers. The calculations underpinning the Rhine fortifications were on the verge of being upended, not through greater armament or sheer manpower, but via U.S. manufacturing brilliance that the German guards never dreamed would target their final barrier of nature. A profound lapse in reconnaissance that would convert Germany's impassable trench into a route for Allied tanks. This downfall had started well before in the flawed evaluations of German intelligence. Oberst Gau Blumentritt, staff head to Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, would afterward reveal to Allied questioners the Wehrmacht's deep misunderstanding of U.S. water-to-land transport potential. Dispatches from Sicily, Salerno, and Normandy had outlined Schwimmwahn, or swimming trucks, but German experts cataloged them as oddities of American extravagance, akin to vessels stocked with ice cream or units supplied with Coca-Cola. Among those holding the line stood Major Hans Georg Model, offspring of Field Marshal Walter Model, attached to the 1st Parachute Army. His private journal, taken after his capitulation in April 1945, offered scholars a window into the German mindset regarding Rhine protection. The Wehrmacht's battle-hardened leaders, veterans of river fights from the Dnieper to the Seine, were convinced they grasped the fixed rules of waterborne attacks. Invaders required massive gun advantages, custom bridging gear, and above all, duration to secure transit sites that guards could assault. Yet the initial stark exposure of German short-sightedness emerged in their evaluation files unearthed at taken command posts. Headman Friedrich Wenzel, a scout officer in the 15th Army, had gathered updates on enemy gear that referenced the Dukw precisely 3 times across 6 months of records. Every mention wrote them off as seaside gear with zero bearing on river combat. The summaries guessed U.S. troops might have 50 to 100 of these machines across the whole European front. The truth was overwhelming. Come March 1945, more than 2,000 Dukws were active in Europe. The U.S. Army had formed them into dedicated water truck platoons, each boasting 50 machines and skilled operators. Such groups had rehearsed stream traversals ever since Normandy, crafting tactics that German scouts entirely overlooked. The British obtained 2,000 Dukws via Lend-Lease, incorporating their unique tactical tweaks. Canadian troops managed 800 with adaptations for harsh winters. The Dukw's creation embodied peak American ingenuity in tackling challenges. Back in April 1942, after a Coast Guard cutter grounded on a shoal off Provincetown, Massachusetts, standard vehicles failed to approach it across the waves and dunes. This small mishap ignited a shift in water assault tactics that would eventually dismantle the Third Reich. Palmer Klett Putnam from the Office of Scientific Research and Development teamed with boat builder Rod Stevens Jr. and mechanic Dennis Piston to conceive a vehicle fluidly shifting between sea and soil. When Ford Motor Company rejected the idea, insisting it couldn't meet the tight deadline, General Motors Corporation stepped up on April 23, 1942. The engineering crew at GMC's yellow truck and coach manufacturing facility in Pontiac, Michigan, toiled non-stop. Just 30 days afterward, on June 2, 1942, the initial prototype emerged. This machine merged a conventional GMC CCKW 212-ton truck frame with a sealed body crafted by Sparkman and Stevens Yacht Architects. The DUKW label stemmed from GMC's coding method, D indicating the 1942 model year, U for utility purpose, K signifying all-wheel drive, and W denoting twin rear axles. What made the DUKW so adaptable were key advancements. Frank Spear, part of GMC's design group, invented the Central Tire Inflation System, or CTIS, the inaugural version globally, enabling operators to alter tire pressure on the go. Tires set to 10 to 12 pounds per square inch expanded broadly for better grip in sand and mud. When raised to 40 to 45 psi, they optimized performance on roads. A 25-inch propeller, powered via a transfer case connected to the primary gearbox, delivered aquatic movement at 5.5 knots, and a rudder tied to the steering mechanism ensured smooth shifts between water and ground travel. In June 1942, Major General Jacob Dease witnessed the debut showcase and promptly mandated large-scale output. The original agreement demanded 2,000 vehicles. By the conflict's close, GMC had produced 21,147 DUKWs, hitting a remarkable rate of 525 units monthly at the height of operations, with each priced at $10,750, about the cost of 7 Jeeps, yet offering invaluable functions. Come March 1945, Germany's Rhine defenses sat in disarray that Wehrmacht leaders wouldn't admit, even privately. General Alfred Schlemm's premier parachute army, the strongest remaining German unit in the West, had suffered devastating losses in the Reichswald clashes, with 90,000 troops killed, injured, or taken prisoner. The troops rushing in to guard the Rhine consisted of Volkssturm contingents, elderly men and youths given mere weeks of preparation, equipped with seized arms and sporting armbands rather than proper attire. Feldwebel Otto Kraus from the 181st Infantry Division, stationed close to the river, penned a note to his spouse on March 20th. "The Americans are right opposite us now, thousands strong. Their engines rumble constantly, day and night, yet the Rhine shields us. Napoleon himself couldn't ford the Rhine under fire. Our sappers have blown all bridges, and the guns have zeroed in on every potential ford." On maps, the barriers looked imposing. From September 1944 onward, more than 200,000 forced civilian workers had bolstered the West Wall defenses and pushed them closer to the Rhine. Around 3,000 concrete pillboxes and artillery sites had been built or upgraded. The waterway itself formed the ideal barrier per German tactics. Broad enough to thwart attack spans, rapid enough to foil watercraft, and profound enough to block wading. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, who took over Western Command following Gerd von Rundstedt's removal, distributed directives that exposed core German beliefs. Foes will need 48 to 72 hours to secure lasting footholds post-first fords. This gap lets our quick response forces strike back. Those rapid units included 47 Panzer Corps boasting roughly 150 working armored assets, tanks, self-propelled guns, and tank killers to span a 200-mile line. Yet the gravest German oversight was strategic. Wehrmacht principles, honed over 5 years of fighting, viewed river assaults as step-by-step endeavors, bombard guards with barrages, ferry foot soldiers over in rushcraft, secure tiny outposts, start building spans amid shots, bolster slowly as links finish. Only then dispatch tanks. Every stage gave guards chances to focus barrages and mount ripostes. Unbeknownst to German scouts, Allied troops had gathered the biggest ever fleet of waterland vehicles along the Rhine's western shore. By March 22, 1945, scores of DUKWs waited hidden in spots less than 5 miles from intended fords. Every craft had undergone sealing, full checks, and loading with balanced payloads to ensure flotation. Lieutenant Colonel William Thompson, leader of the 458th Amphibious Truck Company, remembered the thorough setup. This wasn't like Normandy's waves and barriers. The Rhine meant dealing with flow, ramps, and sinking with our own guns to avoid friendly hits. We drilled on the Maas River for 2 weeks, mastering Dukw behavior in rushing streams. Drawing from 3 years of battlefield lessons, the machines featured upgrades. Protective shields guarded operators and key parts. Mounts for 50 caliber guns added personal protection. Above all, advanced bilge pumps managed leaks from bullet holes, letting Dukws keep going despite hull breaches. Captain James Mitchell of the 819th Amphib. The officers from the General Truck Company outlined the concluding instructions. They explained that we would undertake an unprecedented maneuver, employing Dukws as the main attack transports for a significant river traversal. Not merely as auxiliary boats or logistics transports once bridges were erected, but as the vanguard itself. Every Dukw would transport an entire infantry platoon complete with gear, navigate the Rhine, ascend the far shoreline, and deliver personnel right to the front lines. The UK troops possessed their own waterland vehicles. The 79th Armored Division, commanded by Major General Percy Hobart, had delivered 600 LVT-4 Buffalo amphibious carriers, each able to hold 30 personnel. These would operate in tandem with the U.S. Dukws during what evolved into the biggest riverine amphibious operation ever in warfare. Yet it was the Dukw's capacity to shift fluidly between aquatic and terrestrial maneuvers that would most disrupt German expectations. At 1700 hours on March 23, 1945, the most intense cannonade of the Rhine offensive began. More than 4,000 Allied artillery pieces, ranging from 25-pounders to 240mm howitzers, unleashed a 4-hour onslaught that transformed the atmosphere into an impenetrable barrier of metal and blasts. German spotters noted that the opposite shore seemed to churn violently beneath the onslaught of thousands of projectiles every minute. Gerrit Henrik Meuler, stationed at a lookout near Xanten, tried to tally the gun flashes on the far side. He quit after reaching 500. It resembled an unbroken ribbon of fire extending northward and southward beyond visibility. The din defied words, not separate detonations, but an unending thunder that rendered concentration impossible. Shielded by this barrage in the night, the initial Dukws plunged into the Rhine at 2100 hours. The 51st Highland Division spearheaded the push, with the 7th Battalion of the Black Watch embarking on Dukws handled by American operators. Each craft bore 12 fully geared infantrymen alongside its 2-person team. Dimmed navigation beacons, visible solely from the rear, indicated launch and arrival zones on either side. Sergeant Robert McPhersonson from the Black Watch recounted the transit. "We descended the slope and abruptly began drifting. The U.S. operators simply pressed on as if we remained on solid ground, though now waves surged alongside. The motor's clamor was overwhelming, and German rounds struck the surface nearby, yet the gloom and haze concealed everything. The flow turned out fiercer than anticipated, 8 to 10 knots in the central flow. Dukws set out north of their target landings, operators adjusting for drift akin to pilots charting flight paths amid gusts. Certain units drifted hundreds of yards off course, but their power to climb any moderately inclined shore allowed disembarkation at whatever spot they reached. By 2200 hours, the lead group had made it over. German sentries, anticipating the sound of attack craft heading back for follow-ups, detected only the persistent artillery rumble. The Dukws had motored directly onto the eastern slopes and vanished into the shadows, their occupants already clashing with enemy outposts from surprising angles. As daybreak arrived on March 24th, German leaders started getting dispatches that challenged comprehension. Foe soldiers were materializing several miles interior from transit zones in company-sized units, equipped with substantial arms and provisions. The anticipated gradual buildup of beachheads failed to develop. Rather, Allied units appeared ubiquitous simultaneously. Headman Karl Richet, overseeing a section of 88mm cannons aimed at the crossing area at Ries, messaged Corps Command, "Foe vehicles are in our rear. Repeat, Foe vehicles are behind our lines. How did they traverse? All spans are demolished. No bridging activity observed. What the Reich faced were not armored columns, but Dukws hauling foot soldiers with support arms, mortars, heavy weapons, and anti-armor pieces that had motored straight from the Rhine to spots 3 miles interior. The machine's dual-purpose design enabled skirting of enemy fortifications, guarding predictable paths from the water's edge. The operation's magnitude revealed itself as the morning mist cleared. Scores of Dukws ferried across the Rhine in unending flows. In contrast to invasion craft needing specialist handlers and confined to straight-line paths at designated spots, Dukws could launch and land at any accessible river edge. German gunspotters described floating lorries fording at scores of locations over a 22-mile sector. Major Wilhelm Hoffmann, the planning chief for the 185th Division, noted in his log, "Adversaries have introduced an amphibious transport in quantities beyond our forecasts. Our strategy presupposed 6 to 8 ford sites we could bombard with focused barrages. Yet they ford indiscriminately. Our batteries cannot address so many objectives at once." The British Second Army's fording at Wesel utilized a crippling mix of Dukws and the amphibious vehicles known as Buffalo LVTs, ferried the 15th Scottish Division across the water, as Dukws transported their artillery and essential gear. Even amid intense opposition from the 1st Parachute Army, by 8 a.m., 3 entire divisions had made it to the eastern side of the Rhine, fully equipped. At 10 on March 24th, the roar of plane motors intensified the chaos of combat. Operation Varsity kicked off, the biggest airborne assault in a single day ever recorded, as a huge fleet of aircraft materialized above the Rhine. It featured over 1,700 cargo planes and more than 1,350 gliders, delivering 16,000 paratroopers and glider-borne soldiers. Rather than the standalone jump that German tactics had predicted, this was a synchronized strike meant to complement the waterborne advance. Oberleutnant Franz Huber from the 84th Infantry Division observed the scene from his spot close to Hammenkelln. The heavens darkened under a swarm of planes, chutes unfurled like blossoms, numbering in the thousands. We figured this was the primary push, with the river fords serving as feints. Soon enough, we discovered the Americans had advanced 10 kilometers to our rear using their amphibious vehicles. The paratroop units, the American 17th Airborne Division and the British 6th Airborne Division, touched down within shelling distance of the Rhine ford points, a move German leaders hadn't foreseen. In earlier jumps, troops had been inserted deep into hostile territory to function on their own. Here, they came down only 6 miles from the waterway, offering immediate aid to the landing parties. The synergy between the sky drops and the river assault greatly amplified their impact. Dukws hauling bullets, bandages, and other necessities headed straight to the airborne sites, positions that, in prior missions, would have depended on aerial resupply or rendezvous with advancing troops. Not long after, injured jumpers were carried back across in Dukws heading to the far shore, a feat unheard of in standard airborne campaigns. Private First Class Donald Burgett from the 17th Airborne recounted in his later account, "We were battling over this intersection when these odd amphibious rigs rolled in. No sloshing around, no getting stuck. They emerged from the trees acting like ordinary vehicles, though we realized they'd just forded the Rhine. The operator shouted, 'Anyone short on rounds?' We figured it was a mirage. Come noon on March 24th, the true scope of the Dukw crossing dawned on the German officers. This went beyond a fresh method for navigating waterways. It represented a total overhaul of water-to-land support that upended all their fortification strategies. Conventional river operations followed strict stages: initial fording, securing the beachhead, erecting spans, and then amassing resources. Every step exposed forces to enemy strikes. Once in place, bridges turned into prime bottlenecks, drawing concentrated fire from guns and bombers. The Dukws sidestepped all those risks. Lieutenant Colonel George Sims, supply chief for the 16th Corps, had set up what he termed Dukw routes over the Rhine. Trucks packed with shells, rations, aid kits, and petrol on the west bank just plunged into the current, traversed it, and offloaded right at frontline units. No halting to unload curbside, no swapping to other transports, no delays for spans. We managed 50 DUKWs hourly at our site, Sims noted. Each hauled 2.5 tons of goods or 25 soldiers. That added up to 125 tons of material or 250 personnel per hour, non-stop. The Germans scanned the horizon for spans to destroy, but none existed, only vehicles motoring through the flow. The mental toll on the defending Germans proved crushing. Feldwebel Hermann Goetz of the 2nd Parachute Regiment jotted in his journal, "They possess endless swimming transports. How does one halt forces that convert every stream into a highway? We demolish bridges to no avail. They bypass them entirely." Frontline quartermasters shared bizarre tales. Technical Sergeant Anthony Russo from the 30th Infantry Division spoke of setting up a stockpile. "We're 3 miles east of the Rhine, on enemy soil, correct?" Then a DUKW arrives fresh from the waves, still soaked, bearing warm meals in sealed bins. The mess crews back west had cooked it up, stowed it aboard the Dukw, and it motored right to our lines. Steaming Joe amid the firefight, the Germans had to figure we'd lost our minds. On March 25th, as daylight broke, German leaders confronted a crisis that Wehrmacht principals had never contemplated. The Rhine, Germany's long-standing shield, had lost all meaning, not through direct capture or puncture, but via American manufacturing prowess that their spies had shrugged off as a gimmick. General Alfred Schlemm, who led the 1st Parachute Army, convened his officers that morning in a rural house near Brunnen. The preserved minutes from this session, drawn from statements by imprisoned subordinates, expose the profound shock among the Germans. Schlemm is said to have declared, "Gentlemen, we readied ourselves for the previous conflict. We expected the foe to assault. Rather than launching a direct assault on our stronghold, the enemy opted to bypass it entirely by vehicle. The scale of the operation was immense. Within the initial 48 hours, the DUKWs had ferried more than 15,000 soldiers over the Rhine. Even more vital, they shuttled 200 vehicles, including jeeps, trucks, and light armored units, that conventional bridging techniques couldn't have positioned for several days yet. Field guns were being hauled across and unleashing barrages from the far shore before German scouts could verify that any traversals had taken place. Obus Heinrich von Ludeschau, who led the surviving elements of Panzer Brigade 106, launched a pushback effort close to Wesel on March 25th. His group's combat log notes, "Advanced toward the waterway to eliminate the foe's foothold, discovered no conventional foothold. Opposing troops spread out over a 15-kilometer line without an obvious focal point. Amphibious transports kept resupplying every sector non-stop. No key objective could be pinpointed. The offensive collapsed amid severe casualties. The Brits enjoyed parallel triumphs. By the close of March 25th, Scottish units had advanced 6 miles into the interior, bolstered by unrelenting DUKW convoys. Officers from the Royal Artillery were directing strikes while perched in DUKWs, leveraging the machine's agility to dodge enemy return fire. This Rhine operation laid bare the stark divide in manufacturing approaches between U.S. volume output and the German focus on artisanal quality. Though Teutonic designers had crafted their amphibious counterpart, the Schlier LWS, the disparity in output volumes explained much of Berlin's ultimate defeat. In several respects, the LWS outshone the DUKW. It accommodated 20 troops versus the DUKW's 25, yet offered enhanced shielding. Its caterpillar tracks delivered better traction in sludge and frost. Teutonic innovators had tackled intricate challenges like sealing track mechanisms and installing dependable bailing pumps. As an engineering feat, it stood out impressively. Yet Germany manufactured just around 100 examples altogether, with far fewer entering active use. The LWS demanded bespoke parts, expert fabricators for construction, and scarce resources for its plating and seals. Everyone ran about 75,000 Reichsmarks, sixfold the DUKW's price tag. In contrast, General Motors churned out 21,747 DUKWs by repurposing off-the-shelf truck elements and streamlined factory processes. The design borrowed its power plant, gearbox, wheels, and myriad other bits from the commonplace CCKW truck, from which 562 750 rolled off lines. Such uniformity allowed any Army tech who knew standard rigs to service a Dukw. Replacement components flowed freely. Wrecked units got fixed swiftly or stripped for parts. Master Sergeant Edwin Coleman, who oversaw upkeep for the 422nd Amphibious Truck Company, highlighted the edge. We maintained 90% of our ducks running during the transit. If a part failed, we had spares on hand. If not, we jury-rigged from a plain truck. Good luck pulling that off with one of their bespoke Teutonic marvels. This mindset went further than raw quantities. U.S. Dukws prioritized simplicity in handling. A typical trooper versed in truck driving could master a Dukw after brief instruction. German rigs needed crews with prolonged specialist training. American output catered to amateur fighters with basic prep. Teutonic engineering banked on elite troops drilled over extended periods. Testimonies from troops on either side of the Rhine capture the personal side of this shift in tech and strategy. These weren't just dry figures on output or high-level reviews. They were youths living the evolution of battle firsthand. Private First Class James H. from the 89th Infantry Division remembered his initial encounter with the Dukws. We stood ready along the western shore, braced to pile into landing craft amid shelling, just as in drills. Suddenly, these odd hybrids, boats on wheels, trundled to the edge. A sailor, yes, Navy, right in Germany's heartland, beckoned us on. I queried, "What's this contraption?" He smirked and replied, "Your ride to Berlin, trooper." Spotting U.S. Navy folks manning Dukws far inside Europe's mainland deepened the disarray for Germans. Seaman Second Class Robert Moody, part of the Sea Service team running Dukws for the Rhine operation, recounted the prisoners' bewilderment. We nabbed some Jerrys fixated on our naval garb. An English speaker among them repeatedly queried, "Why's the U.S. Navy inland? The sea's 300 miles off." He flat out couldn't grasp the scene. German records show mounting despair as the extent of Yankee water-crossing prowess sank in. Lieutenant Friedrich Schulzer, from the 338th Infantry Division, penned in a seized missive after his outfit folded. They rolled over the stream like it was pavement. No stealth, no darting past shell bursts on pontoons, just motoring. Lorry beds packed with GIs motoring through the Rhine. We fired on them, yet replacements poured in endlessly. More and more. From where sprang such hordes? Unteroffizier Paul Brown, taken on March 26th, former German interrogators admitted, "Intelligence reports indicated the Rhine would delay you for weeks, forcing bridge construction that we'd promptly demolish, while your landing craft became sitting ducks for our artillery." No one mentioned amphibious trucks. No alerts came about your ability to ford at any spot whenever you chose. We'd geared up for the incorrect conflict. By March 26, 1945, merely 72 hours following the initial Dukw's plunge into the Rhine, the Nazi defensive lines had utterly crumbled. What Wehrmacht strategy deemed a multi-week endeavor was wrapped up in just 3 days. The Rhine obstacle, touted by propaganda as a bulwark to buy time for Reich-saving talks, had simply vanished. Figures from that frantic period underscored the upheaval's magnitude. Dukws executed more than 5,000 separate fordings. They ferried 15,000 soldiers, 1,200 vehicles, 3,000 tons of gear, and pulled out 2,000 casualties. Conventional bridging efforts, if demanded, would have required 2 weeks for comparable volume amid relentless bombardment. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, frequently faulted for undue timidity, pulled off total tactical shock via widespread use of these water-ready transports. His post-war summary observed, "Foes anticipated a Rhine traversal. They never foresaw us charging straight through it. That oversight doomed their fortifications." General Dwight Eisenhower inspected the ford zones on March 26th. His aide, Captain Harry Butcher, captured the Supreme Commander's response. Ike observed the Dukws shuttling to and fro like routine ferries. He faced Bradley and remarked, "These gadgets turn every German stream into a thoroughfare." Bradley shot back, "The Germans are only now grasping that reality." The mental breakdown was total. Joseph Goebbels' journal note from March 26 stated, "Western front conditions are untenable. Adversaries have breached the Rhine over a wide sector using an unforeseen amphibious transport. Our final geographic shield is breached. Defeat is inevitable." On March 27th, commanders capitalized fully on the Rhine penetration. With Nazi troops in total chaos, Allied leaders loosed their mechanized units. The Dukw's mission of water traversal done unveiled yet another role, functioning as standard lorries pushing alongside tank vanguards. The U.S. 2nd Armored Division, Hell on Wheels, had surged over in unprecedented haste. Armored operators recounted the bizarre sight of trailing Dukws fresh from the Rhine, water streaming off as they sped along German expressways. These versatile machines delivered petrol and munitions straight to forward tank groups, skipping the usual halt for logistics accumulation post-river breach. Major General Isaac White, leading the 2nd Armored, detailed, "We pushed 50 miles that single day of March 27th. In prior campaigns, we'd halt for bridge erection and stockpile assembly. But the Dukws matched our speed. They'd tackle streams in our path, probe ford locations, and set up depots ahead of our core force. Enemy opposition splintered into scattered holdouts. Formations primed for striking bridge sites got outflanked by Allied elements appearing all at once across the map. The inflexible Nazi fortification approach, centered on pinpointing and pulverizing set ford spots, offered zero counter to scores of amphibious rigs forging paths on demand. Oberst Hans von Luck, among Germany's seasoned tank leaders, clashed with U.S. units near Dorst on March 28th. His account recounts the clash. "My outfit hurried to form a roadblock when we stumbled on American positions already entrenched. Questioning a taken junior officer on their swift advance, he gestured at a row of those water trucks and declared, 'Bridges aren't in our playbook.' That's when it hit me. Germany hadn't merely forfeited an engagement, we'd surrendered a whole mode of combat. The Dukw's profound effect on the Rhine operation surpassed mere tallies of hauls and cargoes moved. These buoyant trucks reshaped the equation of waterway assaults, yielding benefits that multiplied rapidly. Standard fords funneled troops to choke points, ripe for shelling and bombing. Dukws spread fords across the full line, spreading thin the German fire support. Wehrmacht tactics urged swift strikes on budding bridgeholds prior to their buildup. Yet no classic bridgeholds emerged, only steady seepage over an expansive zone. Colonel William Thompson, overseeing Dukw efforts for the 9th Army, tallied the efficiency gains. Erecting a sturdy pontoon span amid gunfire usually demanded 12 to 24 hours at least. In that span, you'd bolster via landing craft, perhaps a platoon hourly under ideal conditions. With Dukws, we shifted a full battalion each hour. From the outset of the mission, the medical effects were substantial, yet frequently ignored. Captain Dorothy Anderson, serving as a nurse in the 45th Field Hospital, outlined the evacuation process. Injured troops were placed aboard Dukws along the eastern shore and transported straight to our facility on the western bank. There were no vehicle switches or delays for bridging. We managed to rush the injured into operations barely an hour after their wounds, a feat unattainable in standard river traversals. The Dukws further allowed for strategic advances that conventional bridging techniques could not support. Forward artillery spotters shifted positions swiftly via Dukws, rendering German retaliatory barrages futile. Engineers employed Dukws to haul bridge components, thereby speeding up conventional builds while diminishing their necessity. Mobile radio units housed in Dukws sustained contact over the watery divide. After the war, evaluations exposed the extent of German espionage shortcomings concerning U.S. amphibious assets. The Wehrmacht had witnessed Dukws during several campaigns, Sicily, Salerno, Anzio, Normandy, but failed to comprehend their potential in river assaults. General Major Reinhard Gahlen, head of Foreign Armies East and eventual creator of West German intelligence, confessed in his recollections, "We documented U.S. gear with great care. We were aware of the Dukw. Yet we never conceived that they would deploy hundreds en masse for a river assault. Our perspective was limited by our own shortcomings. Since we manufactured only a few amphibious craft, we presumed the Americans encountered the same restrictions." Seized German dossiers showed consistent undervaluation. In a February 1945 review, Army Group H gauged Allied amphibious assets for river work at roughly 100 to 150 units. In reality, the 21st Army Group alone commanded more than 2,000. Yet another document downplayed Dukws as adequate for logistics once shorelines were held, but inadequate for frontal attacks. This oversight extended past quantities alone. German spies overlooked the dedicated amphibious truck units, missed spotting their drills on vast waterways, and ignored the ongoing shift in military doctrine. They geared up to counter the river breach they anticipated, not the reality that unfolded. Major Joachim Engelmann, an intel specialist for the 1st Parachute Army, shared post-capture. "We examined every Allied river effort from the Rapido to the Seine. We believed we had their tactics figured out. The concentrated use of amphibious carriers was entirely absent from our projections. It resembled inventing airborne armor over the river, beyond our conceptual bounds." Even with the evident edge in tactics and technology at the Rhine, the traversal exacted a toll. The toll on lives, though much reduced compared to usual storming tactics, was still considerable. Operations Plunder and Varsity resulted in 6,781 Allied losses, 3,968 from British and Commonwealth ranks, 2,113 U.S. troops. Paratroopers endured severe hits from flak, with certain planes downed prior to jumps. The 17th Airborne Division endured 430 fatalities in one day. Dukws ferrying the hurt-faced German shelling, losing multiple vehicles and their full crews. Oscar Friedensen, an engineer in the 89th Infantry Division, recounted his group's passage at St. Gorshausen on March 26th. "Out of 420 in our outfit, we dropped 250 while securing the zone. The Dukws sped us over, but the enemy lurked on the elevations with automatics and howitzers. Velocity doesn't grant immunity from rounds." German losses proved devastating. The 1st Parachute Army crumbled as a combat entity. Within the initial 72 hours, over 16,000 captives were taken. Numerous soldiers deserted their posts upon grasping that the Rhine obstacle had collapsed. Whole formations ended up isolated as Dukw-borne units materialized in their rear. Gerrit Vera Hoffmann from the 84th Infantry Division fell on March 25th. His questioning exposed the mental blow. "We clung to our lines for 2 days, shooting at the fording points. Suddenly, Americans popped up behind us. When we quizzed the captives on their passage, they gestured to those floating trucks. Our lieutenant discarded his rifle and declared, 'If they can steer trucks over the Rhine, the conflict's done.' No one contested it." Among the standout moments of the Rhine traversal happened on March 25th, as Prime Minister Winston Churchill demanded to cross the river himself. Far from just showmanship, Churchill recognized the pivotal role of Allied forces breaching Germany's hallowed waterway. Joined by Field Marshal Montgomery and General Alan Brooke, Churchill initially viewed the efforts from a wrecked rail span at Wesel. Afterward, despite fervent warnings from his security detail, despite the intricate planning and President Eisenhower's direct instructions, Winston Churchill stepped onto a U.S. LCVP, a landing craft designed for vehicles and troops, and made his way to the eastern shore. Lieutenant Colonel Trumbull Warren, aide-de-camp to Field Marshal Montgomery, documented the event. The British Prime Minister showed unyielding resolve. He declared, "I'm going to cross the Rhine. I've waited years for this moment." The American sailors were stunned upon recognizing their distinguished guest, yet Churchill had already settled in, cigar firmly in his mouth, flashing V for victory gestures. For half an hour, the leader of Britain remained on German land beyond the Rhine, as enemy shells exploded nearby, showering the group with fragments. Churchill allegedly scooped up some soil and remarked, "German soil." Ultimately, the excursion proved militarily redundant and hazardous, yet it carried immense symbolic weight. The head of the British government on seized German ground. This episode highlighted yet another benefit of the waterborne offensive. Churchill managed the transit thanks to the non-stop activity of Dukws and assault boats. Under conventional bridging methods, such a trip would have demanded halting all troop movement across a vital span. The widespread deployment in the amphibious effort allowed for Churchill's dramatic display. The triumph at the Rhine hastened the conclusion of the war in Europe by roughly 3 weeks, based on after-action reviews from the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey. This speed-up stemmed not just from the act of fording the river, but from the rapid scale and scope facilitated by water-adapted transport. Standard river crossing strategies demanded step-by-step actions: secure modest footholds, construct spans amid bombardment, bolster positions slowly, and then push forward following logistics accumulation. Even if effective, this approach would have spanned at least 2 to 3 weeks. The Germans could have fortified fresh positions, wrecked key facilities, and possibly sought terms. In contrast, the Allies accomplished in just 72 hours what enemy planners expected to require far longer. By March 26, 3 Allied armies surged deep into the heart of Germany. The Ruhr, the nation's manufacturing core, found itself surrounded. By April 1st, the blistering pace stopped the Germans from demolishing plants, crossings, and resources that could have extended the fight. General Omar Bradley assessed the casualties averted. Had we relied on conventional Rhine tactics, using storm boats, sappers erecting bridges under shell fire, and incremental support, we'd have suffered at least 50,000 losses. The Dukws transformed a potential slaughter into a mere logistics maneuver. The broader effects extended toward the east. Upon hearing of the Rhine success, Soviet troops quickened their push to Berlin, determined not to let the Western powers seize the Nazi stronghold. The contest between the East and West, which defined the post-war landscape of Europe, gained urgency from the Dukws' Rhine traversal. By March 28, 1945, the German High Command in the West had essentially unraveled. Links among formations collapsed as commands fell back or got overwhelmed. The velocity of the Allied thrust, powered by the Rhine victory, blocked any unified counter. Field Marshal Walter Model, leading Army Group B, saw his troops fragmented and cornered in the Ruhr pocket. His last directive, dated March 29th, conveyed utter hopelessness. The enemy has achieved the impossible at the Rhine. Further resistance only increases suffering. I release all soldiers from their oath. Save yourselves as best you can. Model took his own life on April 21st rather than capitulate. The mental breakdown was total. Wehrmacht troops who had battled fiercely for each German hamlet now gave up in droves. The Rhine carried legendary status. Its fall signaled the end of the conflict. Formations that could have waged partisan actions simply disbanded. Among civilians, spirit already broken by air raids utterly crumbled. The Rhine fording proved that no geographic obstacle could shield Germany. If the Rhine fell in 3 days, why persist in the struggle? Regional leaders started arranging the handover of their communities to spare devastation. Hans Frank, the Nazi Governor-General of Poland, noted in his journal, "The Rhine is crossed. The sacred river that protected Germany for 2,000 years has fallen in 72 hours. If there was any doubt about our fate, it is gone. We face not defeat, but annihilation." The Rhine operation reshaped ideas in military circles regarding water-based maneuvers. Before March 1945, such assaults were mainly linked to sea-to-land strikes, like those at Normandy or in the Pacific Island campaigns. The Rhine showed that these techniques proved just as pivotal in inland battles. The U.S. Army's formal chronicle stated that the widespread use of Dukws at the Rhine marked a transformative shift in warfare, comparable to tanks' debut in World War I. The capacity to navigate watery barriers like roads rather than treating them as impasses. The use of Dukws completely transformed battlefield strategy during the Rhine operation. Soviet liaison officers embedded with Allied command units meticulously documented the proceedings. In his dispatch to Moscow, Colonel Ivan Yakushin noted, "The U.S. forces overcame river obstacles via large-scale manufacturing. They produced such vast quantities of amphibious transports that waterways lost their strategic value. This approach will shape potential European engagements ahead." Even though the British participated directly, their military undertook thorough reviews. Brigadier Richard Goodbody observed, "In the future, we cannot rely on rivers as major defensive features when facing foes equipped with suitable watercrossing gear." The Rhine assault demonstrated how manufacturing prowess outweighs natural terrain challenges. Although commanders touted their leadership for the Rhine triumph, the real credit belonged to the Dukw operators who enabled it all. These soldiers, including many from U.S. Navy units, ended up deep in German territory maneuvering essentially exposed vessels on the water. Seaman First Class Joseph Bernardini from Naval Unit 350 recounted a standard transit. You're steering this large, sluggish craft over 300 feet of exposed river. German 88s are firing at you. Shells from mortars are exploding nearby. Machine gun bursts are zeroing in. There's limited room to maneuver without the flow carrying you off course. You simply hold the steering wheel tight, advance the throttle, and hope for the best. Repair teams achieved extraordinary feats to sustain the Dukws amid combat. Laboring amid gunfire, frequently at night, they fixed punctured hulls, swapped out propellers fouled by wreckage, and ensured motors kept going even when drenched in Rhine water. Master Sergeant Thomas Riley from the 458 Amphibious Truck Company's support group stated, "We sealed leaks using whatever materials were at hand, flattened ration tins, pieces of captured German tank plating, or even wooden stoppers. As long as it stayed afloat and propelled forward, we made it work." UK Dukw drivers, instructed by their American counterparts, introduced fresh adaptations. Sergeant Major William Davies of the Royal Army Service Corps devised a method to extract personnel from disabled armor. "We pulled alongside flaming tanks, positioning our truck as cover, and hauled injured crew members on board. The moisture running off our sides eased the intense warmth. That saved the lives of many soldiers." Post-war German experts delved deeply into the reasons for their collapse. The Rhine incursion stood out in these evaluations as a lapse in foresight alongside resource shortages. In 1948, General Franz Halder, ex-head of the General Staff, reflected, "We geared up thoroughly against the expected Allied Rhine assault. Reserves were placed, guns pre-sighted, bridges rigged for destruction, everything aligned with established principles. Yet we failed to conceive of the adversary deploying hundreds of machines that rendered the river moot." A 1946 assessment by detained Wehrmacht personnel conceded, "The U.S. mass employment of amphibious trucks introduced a combat style we hadn't foreseen and couldn't oppose given our means. Knowledge in advance wouldn't have helped. German factories couldn't match the output." The Rhine defeat originated in American assembly lines, not the river's edges. Colonel General Heinz Guderian, pioneer of blitzkrieg tactics, provided one of the sharpest insights. "We in Germany mastered the craft of combat. The Americans mastered its commerce. On the Rhine, commerce triumphed over craft. Their aquatic lorries lacked refinement or complexity, but their abundance and reliability defined them. That's the essence of U.S. military method." Though pivotal, the Dukw's contribution to the Rhine transit has often been eclipsed by flashier moments, like seizing the Remagen Bridge, the huge paratroop drop, or Montgomery's orchestrated offensive. Still, those who lived it recognized the vehicle's core importance. In his book Crusade in Europe, General Dwight Eisenhower remarked, "Scholars argue over the war's accelerators, air campaigns, Russian advances, or coalition harmony. But I contend that experts overlook the unassuming Dukw. Lacking it, the Rhine would have turned into a slaughter zone. Thanks to it, we advanced through Germany as casually as sightseers on vacation. The Dukws pressed on beyond the Rhine, fording the Elbe, the Danube, and numerous minor streams. They ferried out exhausted survivors from camps unable to trek on foot. They delivered supplies to famine-struck populations in remote zones. The machines that shattered Germany's final line morphed into tools for mercy missions." Technical Sergeant Paul Morrison of the 336th Amphibious Truck Company remembered deploying his Dukw post-surrender. The same rig that braved Rhine fire now hauled provisions to youngsters in inundated districts around Hamburg. It was a novelty to them, a swimming lorry. Children pursued us, shouting, "Swim wagon, swim wagon." It's ironic how a war machine ultimately preserved lives once peace arrived. The 21,947 Dukws manufactured in World War II symbolized. These vehicles represented far more than mere transportation tools. They symbolized the core tenets of American manufacturing ingenuity. Whereas German designers chased flawless precision in limited batches, U.S. producers aimed for reliable functionality on a massive scale. This mindset reached well beyond the Dukws. The very same plants assembling these versatile amphibians were churning out 2.5-ton haulers at a staggering pace of 10,000 units monthly. The metal for Dukw hulls originated from foundries that launched Liberty ships every 42 hours. Power plants came from production lines capable of seamlessly switching between engines for trucks, planes, and tanks with little reconfiguration. In 1944, Donald Nelson, head of the War Production Board, toured a Dukw assembly facility. He noted, "Over the course of 1 hour, I saw them finish 6 Dukws, each flawed by German benchmarks, crude seams, straightforward fixes, coated in olive drab. Yet every one would ford the Rhine. German plants might dedicate a full month to crafting a single impeccable amphibian craft. In that span, we assembled 180 serviceable alternatives. By contrast, the sleeker German Landwasser Schlepper exposed the drawbacks of artisanal methods. Every LWS demanded skilled artisans, bespoke parts, and thorough evaluations. When Allied air raids severed logistics, output ground to a halt. A single absent piece halted everything. U.S. Dukw operations, however, just swapped in substitutes and pressed on. The triumph at the Rhine echoed across the war's closing phase. Units across the Reich discovered that Western Allied forces had surmounted the ultimate obstacle effortlessly. Spirits, already wavering, collapsed utterly. In Italy, troops clinging to rugged heights for months abruptly pulled back. Field Marshal Kesselring observed, "The report of the Rhine breach triggered a swift plunge in soldierly resolve. Troops wondered, if the Rhine fails to halt them, what will?" I had no reply. Isolated yet potent German contingents in Norway, Denmark, and the Netherlands started arranging regional capitulations. The legend of an invincible Rhine had fueled dreams of a truce. Its collapse in just 72 hours rendered further defiance futile. Even in Berlin, encircled by Soviet troops, the event left its mark. Hitler's last documented strategy session on April 27th featured his regret. "The Rhine fell due to our failure to foresee their waterborne prowess. We geared up for the incorrect conflict." That may have been his sole astute judgment on the whole campaign. During a 1985 gathering of Rhine crossing survivors in Lexington, Kentucky, elderly troops convened to recall those pivotal 3 days that dashed Nazi Germany's final prospects. A handful of surviving Dukws, maintained as memorials, attracted special focus. Ex-Sergeant James Mitchell, leader of a Dukw unit in the 819th Amphibious Truck Company, paused by one such relic. "It's an eyesore, right? Sort of like a watercraft crossed with a lorry, birthing a hybrid that's neither fish nor fowl, but this homely contraption navigated the Rhine when the Nazis deemed it unthinkable. We didn't overpower them in combat. We surpassed them in output, ingenuity, and foresight." Former Obergefreiter and chronicler Hans Müller, who guarded the Rhine with the 181st Infantry Division, joined as a special attendee. His address to the group resonated deeply. "You arrived at a river skirmish with amphibious lorries. We deployed anti-armor cannons to block amphibious lorries. The instant those machines emerged from the Rhine, I realized the end had come. Not merely defeat, conclusion. You can't battle foes who convert your mightiest bulwark into a thoroughfare." The event underscored a fundamental insight. Victory at the Rhine stemmed not from unmatched bravery or strategic genius, but from vast productive power funneled via creative adaptation. The true champions included factory hands in Pontiac, every bit as much as frontline fighters in Europe. From March 23 to 26, 1945, this was more than a routine tactical win. It signified the ascendancy of U.S. industrial egalitarianism against German martial elitism, of volume manufacturing against artisanal excellence, of adaptable creativity against inflexible creed. The Dukw epitomized American essence, not the ultimate amphibian design conceivable, but the optimal one feasible for large-scale fabrication using available means. It tackled challenges via abundance over refinement, uniformity over customization. It was handled by everyday recruits after basic instruction, not elite fighters honed over decades. Such tactics appalled seasoned German officers. Captured in Britain, General von Rundstedt griped, "Conflict has devolved into an industrialist's domain, not a commander's craft. Your aquatic vehicles weren't armaments of battle, but outputs of commerce. You bested us not amid the fray but within the workshops. And that shift was the very essence. The United States had leveled the playing field in combat, mirroring its equalization in industry. The Dukw stood for more than tactical utility. It embodied productive ethos, the conviction that challenges yield to ample output, deftly coordinated. The final A detailed examination of the Rhine crossing mission underscores the pivotal role played by the Dukw. Key assets deployed included hundreds of Dukws directly engaged in the Rhine traversal, backed by 600 British Buffalo LVTs. Over 2,000 Dukws stood ready across the theater of operations. Germany managed to produce around 100 LWS units, though only a handful were battle-ready. Logistical feats from March 23 to March 31, 1945, encompassed ferrying more than 15,000 troops, shuttling by 200 vehicles, distributing 3,000 tons of supplies, extracting 2,000 wounded personnel, and executing over 5,000 separate Dukw trips. In terms of manufacturing, the United States built 21,147 Dukws, while 550 conventional trucks utilized shared Dukw parts. Germany output roughly 100 LRWS vehicles with no dedicated designs for riverine assaults. Timeline highlights feature a mere 38 days from initial Dukw concept to working model, a 72-hour push to shatter Rhine fortifications, a 3-week reduction in overall conflict duration, and an estimated aversion of 50,000 Allied losses. Financial breakdown shows $10,150 per Dukw against Reichsmarks per LWS, yielding a 7.1 economic edge for U.S. efforts, alongside an unmatched superiority in field application. The Dukw's contribution to the Rhine assault extended far beyond its tactical successes. It illustrated how strategic innovation could emerge not from concealed armaments, but from overwhelming rollout of tools that foes had overlooked as trivial. The insights from the Rhine reshaped subsequent military strategies. During the Cold War, NATO strategies prioritized amphibious transports for navigating Europe's eastern waterways. Inspired by U.S. triumphs, the Soviets engineered comprehensive lines of water-capable vehicles. Today, armed services view riverine mobility as a core competency, not a niche skill. Outside the realm of combat, the Rhine operation affirmed the U.S. approach to manufacturing. Volume trumped refinement when scale was adequate, readiness outshone flawlessness, dependability surpassed complexity. Such principles influenced American commerce well past wartime needs. The Marshall Plan's European reconstruction embodied Dukw tenets, favoring vast uniform assistance over tailored fixes. Civilian road networks drew on wartime supply chain expertise. The push to space stressed dependable, high-volume parts rather than bespoke artistry. Arguably, the Dukw's most profound legacy lay in its mental toll. German troops and locals beheld U.S. units navigating the revered Rhine as if it were a trivial hurdle. This nonchalant showcase of manufacturing prowess swayed Germans toward inevitable loss more effectively than any leaflet campaign. After the war, dialogues with German residents echoed recurring motifs. They anticipated U.S. forces bogged down at the Rhine for weeks or months, allowing space for wonder weapons or talks. Yet Americans forded it in just 3 days aboard vehicles whose scale was unknown to them. The astonishment lingered deeply. Frau Elizabeth Becker, residing close to Remagen, remembered. Artillery roared on March 23rd, a frightful rumble through the night. We braced for prolonged fighting. By March 26th, U.S. trucks rolled by our house, dripping from the ford. My father, a survivor of the World War, observed them and remarked, "When foes propel trucks across waterways, the fight is finished." His words rang true. This mental unraveling hastened German resignation to capitulation and control. Potential insurgencies failed to arise. The vivid proof of U.S. output at the Rhine persuaded them that opposition was pointless, stemming not solely from battlefield reverses, but from outdated tech. Winston Churchill, who traversed the Rhine amid the campaign, delivered a poignant evaluation in his memoirs. The March, 1945. Rhine fording signified more than piercing Germany's final stronghold. It heralded a fresh mode of conflict. Through their water-traversing lorries, the Americans resolved via production what we in Europe pursued via tactics. They did not conquer the Rhine, they disregarded it. I observed those awkward contraptions, half vessel, half lorry, entirely proficient, pouring over currents that had shielded Germany since the era of Roman cohorts. Every Dukw served as a harbinger of ruin for the Reich, bearing not only fighters, but evidence of Yankee factory dominance. Across my extensive years, I've seen numerous advances in arms, the Gatling gun, the armored car, the flying machine. Yet seldom has anything struck me like those unpretentious floating lorries on the Rhine. They embodied not inventive genius, but administrative brilliance, not Teutonic exactitude, but Yankee practicality. As I lingered on the Rhine's far shore on March 25, 1945, beholding Dukws rising from the stream like ancient creatures shifting from ocean to earth, I realized I was seeing not merely war's close, but the dawn of America's era. On May 7, 1945, merely 6 weeks post-Rhine breach, General Alfred Jodl formalized Germany's total submission at Reims. One of the reasons he pointed to for Germany's downfall was the foe's surprising ability to launch amphibious operations along the Rhine. This confession, tucked away amid broader discussions on aerial bombardments and the Soviet advance, highlighted the genuine significance of that traversal. In his concluding assessment as Allied Supreme Commander, General Eisenhower assigned substantial praise to the Dukw. No other invention played a larger role in the swift overrun of Germany than this versatile amphibious vehicle. It converted waterways from hindrances into thoroughfares, shifted supply chains from constraints to strengths, and likely trimmed the conflict by weeks or even months. The final active Dukw fording of the Rhine took place on May 10, 1945, just 2 days following Germany's capitulation. Rather than troops, it ferried provisions for civilians in remote zones severed by ruined spans. The machine that had shattered Germany's final defensive line now served as a tool for compassionate aid. Private First Class Anthony DeMarco, at the wheel of that ultimate Dukw over the Rhine, later shared, "No gunfire, no shelling, just motoring through as if on a leisurely outing. Children from Germany lined the far shore, eager for any sweets we might have. Mere months before, their dads had been aiming to take us out. Now, we delivered sustenance. That's the essence of those ducks. They made the unfeasible commonplace, adversaries into folks in need." The Rhine fording in March 1945 marks a pivotal juncture in armed conflict annals, valued not merely for its operational cunning or overarching value, but for symbolizing the evolving essence of combat. The Dukw, clumsy, unprotected, and ordinary, had nullified a natural fortress that had safeguarded Germany across 2,000 years. Enemy troops, schooled in every scenario their tactics could foresee, never anticipated that U.S. manufacturing might churn out more than 21,000 units, capable of dismissing rivers as barriers. They geared up for an outdated conflict, not from lack of skill, but from failing to grasp America's manufacturing prowess. The Rhine fell not to assault, but to industrial irrelevance. The scores of Dukws that navigated the Rhine from March 23 to 31, 1945, transported far beyond personnel and gear. They embodied evidence that U.S. volume output could upend the core tenets of battle. Each Wehrmacht fighter observing a Dukw climb the Rhine's eastern side beheld the demise of age-old combat restrictions. Field Marshal Montgomery captured the endeavor with rare succinctness. "We didn't storm the Rhine, we simply traveled over it." This shift from the exceptional to the everyday, the unattainable to the habitual, embodied the Dukw's genuine triumph. The Rhine operation illustrated how, in contemporary fighting, manufacturing power harnessed effectively could accomplish feats beyond the reach of tactical brilliance alone. The Wehrmacht, arguably the era's most adept professional army, was overcome not through better plans or maneuvers, but by buoyant vehicles rolling off Detroit's production belts. Ultimately, the German guardians were spot on in their earlier judgments. The Rhine proved impassable under fierce opposition via conventional approaches. They just never foresaw that American ingenuity would render those approaches outdated. The Dukws that plied the Rhine in March 1945 transported more than warriors. They bore the blueprint of future conflicts, in which production dominance would eclipse terrain superiority, bulk fabrication would surpass artisanal excellence, and adaptable ingenuity would subdue inflexible strategies. The Rhine traversal's core insight lay not in arms, but in industry. Amid the 20th century's all-encompassing struggles, success favored not the finest troops, but the most efficient plants. The German forces remained unaware of America's amphibious transports for the Rhine, not due to spying lapses, but because such abundance lay beyond their imagination. That failure of vision, beyond any battlefield misstep, sealed the Third Reich's final defense at Germany's sacred.